The hammer hit the wood again, thud. And the sound went straight through my chest like it belonged there. I didn't even remember getting out of my car. 1 second I was staring at the bright red, sold sign being lifted into the soft dirt of our front yard. And the next I was running, my shoes sinking into the same ground I used to play on as a child. "Stop," I said louder this time, my voice shaking in a way I couldn't control. "You can't put that there." The contractor barely turned his head. He looked tired, like this was just another job on a long list. "Ma'am," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans, "it's already closed." Closed. The word didn't make sense. It hung in the air like a mistake that nobody was fixing. I felt my stomach drop as I turned slowly, already knowing who I would see before my eyes even found him. My brother stood near a black SUV at the edge of the property, one arm resting casually on the hood like he owned the moment. He was laughing with a man in a sharp gray suit, the kind of laugh you give when money has just changed hands and everything went your way. For a second I just stared at him. Years. That's how long it had been since I'd last seen him. Years of silence, of missed calls, of birthdays that passed like they didn't matter. And now he was here of all places. "You sold it?" I asked, but my voice came out small, almost lost in the open air. He looked at me then. Really looked like I was something inconvenient he had to deal with before getting back to his day. There was no guilt in his face. No hesitation. "It's done," he said. Just like that. Clean. Final. My fingers curled into my palms. "You had no right," I whispered, every word heavy with something I couldn't even name yet. Anger maybe. Or disbelief. He pushed himself off the SUV and took a few slow steps toward me. His expression calm, almost bored. "Actually," he said, with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I did." The world tilted slightly. I looked past him at the house, the faded paint, the porch that leaned just a little to the left, the window I used to sit by with Mom on summer evenings. Everything was still there, exactly the same. But somehow it wasn't mine anymore. It wasn't ours. The man in the suit walked over, holding a folder like it sealed the truth. "We followed all legal procedures," he said smoothly. "The property has been transferred." Legal. Procedures. Transferred. Words that sounded neat and official and completely wrong. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, more to myself than anyone else. "That's not possible." My brother let out a quiet breath, like he was already tired of this conversation. "You should have been around more," he said. "Things change." I felt something break inside me then. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, steady crack that spread through everything I thought I understood. Because I had been around. I never left. And as the wind moved through the yard and the sold sign stood firm in the soil, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't a mistake. This was something he planned. My name is Talia Brooks, and I was the one who stayed when everything else fell apart. That's the part nobody seems to understand when they look at me now, standing in a yard that suddenly doesn't belong to me. They see the argument, the sold sign, the tension, but they don't see the years behind it. They don't see the nights I spent lying awake, listening to the roof creak during storms, wondering if it would finally give in. They don't see the mornings I woke up early just to make sure the pipes hadn't frozen again. This house, this land, it wasn't just property to me. It was work. It was memory. It was the last place my mother ever called home. When she got sick, it was me who stayed by her side. I remember holding her hand in that small bedroom at the end of the hallway, the one with the window that faced the oak tree. Her grip was weak, but she didn't let go. Not until the very end. And even after that I stayed. I handled the paperwork, the bills, the quiet emptiness that filled every corner of the house. I paid the property taxes when the notices started turning red, each letter more urgent than the last. I learned how to fix things I never thought I'd need to: leaks, cracks, broken hinges, because there was no one else to do it. My brother wasn't there for any of it. He left years ago, chasing something he never really explained. First he called now and then. Short conversations. Promises to visit. But those calls got fewer. Then they stopped completely. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. I told myself he needed space. That life had taken him somewhere else. I didn't chase him. I didn't beg him to come back. I had too much here that needed me. But I never thought he'd come back like this. Not for this. Not just to take it all away. Standing in that yard earlier, watching him smile like it was just another deal. Something inside me shifted, because this wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about everything he missed and everything I carried alone. He didn't see the years I gave to this place, to our mother, to the life we were supposed to share responsibility for. And maybe worse, he didn't care. I walked back toward the house slowly after he left, each step heavier than the last. The front door creaked the same way it always had when I pushed it open. Inside, nothing had changed. The same worn couch. The same faint smell of old wood and dust, and something softer underneath. Something that still felt like home. I stood in the middle of the living room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How could something like this be done without me even knowing? My name had to be on everything. It always was. That's when the thought hit me sharp and cold. If the sale was real, then somewhere, somehow it looked like I agreed to it. And that didn't just mean I was losing the house. It meant someone made it look like I gave it away. The county office smelled like old paper and cleaning spray. The kind that tries too hard to feel fresh but never quite gets there. I stood at the front desk, my hands pressed flat against the cool surface, trying to keep my breathing steady. I need to see the documents for the property transfer on Oak Ridge Lane, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and reading glasses low on her nose, nodded and typed something into her computer. I watched her fingers move slow and steady, like this was just another routine request. Like my life hadn't just been flipped upside down a few hours ago. "One moment," she said gently, then disappeared into a back room. The seconds stretched. I glanced around at the rows of filing cabinets, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights above me. Everything here felt permanent, official, like whatever was written down in this building couldn't be easily undone. When she came back, she carried a thin folder. Too thin. That was my first thought. Something this big should have taken more paper. She placed it on the desk between us and opened it carefully, turning it so I could see. "This is the finalized deed transfer," she said. "It was processed last week." Last week. My chest tightened. I leaned in, scanning the page, my eyes moving too fast at first to understand anything. Legal terms. Dates. Signatures. Then I saw it. My name. Talia Brooks. Written in a way that made my stomach drop. "There's your signature," the clerk said softly, pointing to the bottom of the page. I stared at it. It looked right at first glance. The curve of the T, the loop in the B. It was close, too close. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. The spacing was off. The pressure uneven. Like someone had practiced it just enough to pass. "I didn't sign this," I said quietly. The words came out flat, but inside everything was shaking. The clerk hesitated, her expression shifting just slightly. Not disbelief, more like concern. "Are you sure?" she asked. I looked up at her, then back down at the paper. "I'm sure," I said, stronger this time. "I've never even seen this document before." She pressed her lips together and glanced at the file again, as if hoping something might suddenly change. It didn't. "Well," she said slowly, "according to our records, both owners consented to the sale." Both owners. That meant me and my brother. My chest felt tight, like the air had gotten thinner. "What about ID?" I asked. "Wouldn't someone have to verify identity for something like this?" She nodded. "Yes. A notary would have confirmed it." Notary. The word stuck in my head. Someone had looked at a person, checked an ID, and signed off saying it was me. I swallowed hard. "Can I get copies of everything?" I asked. She slid the folder a little closer. "Of course." Then she paused, her voice softer now. "But if you're saying this isn't your signature..." I looked at her, already knowing what she was about to say. "Then you need a lawyer," she finished. I nodded slowly, my eyes still on the paper. Because according to everything in that file, every stamp, every signature, every official mark, this wasn't theft. It was agreement. And somehow, on record, I had already said yes to losing everything. I found him that same evening in the parking lot behind a row of new office buildings on the edge of town. The sun was already low, casting long shadows across the pavement, but I recognized his car instantly. The same black SUV from earlier, still clean. Still out of place here, like it didn't belong to the same world as everything he'd just taken from me. He was leaning against it again, scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened, like selling our home was just another task checked off his list. My chest tightened as I walked toward him, each step steady even though everything inside me wasn't. "You forged it," I said the moment I was close enough. No greeting. No hesitation. He looked up slowly, like I had interrupted something mildly important. For a second he didn't say anything, just studied me with that same calm, distant expression. Then he sighed. Not guilt. Not panic. Just annoyance. "You really went down to the county office already?" he asked, shaking his head slightly. "That was fast." I felt my jaw tighten. "Answer me." He straightened up, slipping his phone into his pocket. "You're making this bigger than it is," he said. His tone was smooth, controlled, like he'd already had this conversation in his head and decided how it should go. I handled something that needed to be handled. I let out a short, disbelieving breath. "By signing my name?" He shrugged. Actually shrugged. "You abandoned the place," he said. The words hit harder than I expected. "I lived there," I shot back. "I never left." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You hid there," he snapped, the first crack in his calm showing through. "There's a difference." I stared at him, trying to understand how he could twist something so completely. "Taking care of Mom isn't hiding," I said, my voice lower now but sharper. "Keeping the house running isn't hiding. That place didn't fall apart because I stayed." He looked away for a second like he didn't want to deal with that part of it. Then he turned back, his expression hardening. "Look," he said, "you were stuck." I wasn't. Someone had to move forward. "By selling it behind my back?" I asked. "It wasn't behind your back," he said quickly. "It was handled." "That's not an answer." He stepped closer now, just enough to close the distance, his voice dropping. "The paperwork is done, Talia. Legally done. You can fight it if you want, but you're not going to win." The certainty in his voice made my stomach turn. Not because I believed him, but because he believed himself. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake to him. Not even a risk. In his mind, this was justified. Clean. Necessary. "You really think you had the right?" I said slowly, searching his face for anything, regret, doubt, something human. There was nothing. "It was my land too," he said. "And I made a decision." I shook my head, a cold realization settling in. "No," I said quietly. "You made a choice for both of us." He didn't respond. Didn't argue. He just looked at me like the conversation was already over. Like I was the only one still trying to hold on to something that didn't exist anymore. And standing there in that empty parking lot, I understood something I hadn't before. He wasn't scared of what he did. He wasn't even worried. Which meant he thought he'd covered everything. Every detail. Every risk. Every way I could try to stop him. The words hit harder than I expected. "I lived there," I shot back. "I never left." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You hid there," he snapped, the first crack in his calm showing through. "There's a difference." I stared at him, trying to understand how he could twist something so completely. "Taking care of Mom isn't hiding," I said, my voice lower now but sharper. "Keeping the house running isn't hiding. That place didn't fall apart because I stayed." He looked away for a second like he didn't want to deal with that part of it. Then he turned back, his expression hardening. "Look," he said, "you were stuck." I wasn't. Someone had to move forward. "By selling it behind my back?" I asked. "It wasn't behind your back," he said quickly. "It was handled." That's not an answer. He stepped closer now, just enough to close the distance, his voice dropping. "The paperwork is done, Talia. Legally done. You can fight it if you want, but you're not going to win." The certainty in his voice made my stomach turn. Not because I believed him, but because he believed himself. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake to him. Not even a risk. In his mind, this was justified. Clean. Necessary. "You really think you had the right?" I said slowly, searching his face for anything, regret, doubt, something human. There was nothing. "It was my land too," he said. "And I made a decision." I shook my head, a cold realization settling in. "No," I said quietly. "You made a choice for both of us." He didn't respond. Didn't argue. He just looked at me like the conversation was already over. Like I was the only one still trying to hold on to something that didn't exist anymore. And standing there in that empty parking lot, I understood something I hadn't before. He wasn't scared of what he did. He wasn't even worried, which meant he thought he'd covered everything. Every detail. Every risk. Every way I could try to stop him. Did anyone else see him? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Mrs. Delgado hesitated. Some of the delivery people. The notary, maybe. But he was careful. Always calm. Always convincing. My mind raced. He had anticipated every move, every potential witness. But not me. Not my memory of that house, of that land, of every brick and tree and corner. Thank you for telling me, I said, gripping her hands. I need everything you remember, every detail, no matter how small. Her eyes met mine, and I saw the same resolve I felt inside her. I'll help, she said softly. You're the only one who can fix this. And in that moment I realized that even though my brother thought he had covered all his tracks, he had underestimated one thing. The person who loved that land the most, who had never left it, and who refused to let it go without a fight. Mrs. Delgado's words ignited something inside me. I wasn't just going to reclaim the house. I was going to uncover every lie, expose every move he had made, and make sure the world saw what he had done. And for the first time since seeing that sold sign, I felt a flicker of hope, tiny but unbreakable, that maybe justice wasn't just a word, it could be mine. I walked into the office of the first lawyer with a folder full of papers and a heart full of fury. The smell of leather and coffee hit me immediately, but it was nothing compared to the sinking feeling in my stomach when he barely looked up from the file on his desk. So what's the problem? He asked, tapping a pen against the desk. I dropped the folder in front of him and said, my brother sold the family land without my consent. He forged my signature and I want it back. He flipped through the papers slowly, his eyes scanning the documents like he was reading a foreign language. Then he leaned back and sighed. These cases are hard to win, he said finally. Property transfers, once completed, the courts rarely undo them. Especially if there's a claim the paperwork looks legitimate. My stomach sank. So that's it? I'm just supposed to accept that he stole everything. He shrugged almost apologetically. You can try, but it won't be quick. And it won't be easy. I stared at him, feeling the weight of his words like a heavy stone pressing down on my chest. I'm not asking for easy, I said quietly but firmly. I'm asking for right. He looked up finally, his expression hardening slightly. Right doesn't always win, Ms. Brooks. This isn't about what's fair. It's about what the law recognizes. I left the office feeling the chill of reality creeping into my bones. The world didn't care about the years I spent keeping the house alive. The nights I stayed awake patching leaks. The moments I held my mother's hand as she slipped away. None of that mattered. What mattered was a signature on a piece of paper. A signature he had forged, and the law that might never see the truth. But I refused to accept that. I refused to let him win. As I walked past the familiar streets that led back to my apartment, I thought about Mrs. Delgado's words. I wasn't entirely alone. There were people who had seen him, who remembered the lies he told, who might stand with me. And if the first lawyer couldn't help me, then I would find someone who could. Because no matter how difficult or slow the path, I was going to take back what was mine. The sun was setting behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across the street. The sold sign still haunted the yard across from Mrs. Delgado's, but in my mind I pictured it gone. Replaced by the promise that I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. And in that resolve, I felt the first spark of determination that would carry me through the storm ahead. No matter how many obstacles my brother, the courts, or the world put in my way. I managed to track down the developer who had bought the land, a tall man in a crisp gray suit who looked like he stepped straight out of a business magazine. My pulse raced as I approached him outside the construction office. You bought stolen property, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, that practiced, calm smile that made my stomach twist. We bought it legally, he said smoothly. Legally? I echoed, my hands balling into fists. You didn't. My brother forged my signature. The sale is invalid. He tilted his head slightly, still smiling. Then prove it, he said, turning toward the glass doors as if the challenge wasn't even worth his full attention. My jaw tightened. They weren't afraid. They believed the paperwork was solid, that the signature and the documents had covered every angle. My chest tightened at the thought. He had planned this perfectly. The system had backed him up before I even knew what happened. I tried to hold on to calm. "You have copies of the notarized papers, the transfer documents, everything?" I asked. He nodded. "Exactly. You see, once the transaction is recorded, it's binding. Even if there's a dispute, it doesn't mean we have to undo it immediately." I felt like the ground had slipped from beneath me. My hands shook, but I forced myself to stay upright. "Binding doesn't mean right," I said. "Fraud isn't legal." His smile didn't falter, but there was the slightest flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe annoyance, maybe curiosity. "We trust the process," he said. And with that he walked back inside, leaving me outside in the chill evening air, staring at the shiny glass doors that reflected my fury and frustration. I realized then just how carefully my brother had orchestrated everything. The sale wasn't just about money, it was about creating an illusion of legitimacy so perfect that even the buyers felt safe. But I also realized something else. Their confidence meant they were unprepared for a fight. They had counted on the documents being enough to silence me. They didn't know I had Mrs. Delgado, my mother's letters, and my determination. And I wasn't going to let a confident smile stop me. I turned away from the building, my mind racing with plans. If the buyers thought the paperwork was untouchable, I would prove them wrong. Every forged signature, every manipulated document, every lie my brother spun would come back to haunt him. The air was colder now, sharper, and I welcomed it. It reminded me that the storm was just beginning, and I was ready to meet it head-on. No matter how confident they were, no one could prepare for the fire that burned when someone fights not just for property, but for justice, for memory, for a home that had been stolen from them. That night I sat alone in the dark of my old bedroom, the floor creaking under my weight as I opened the closet where Mom used to store her keepsakes. Dust rose like tiny ghosts around me, and I coughed, waving my hand in front of my face. Then I spotted it. A small wooden box, worn at the edges, the lock long broken. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of papers, some yellowed, some neatly folded, all tied with thin, faded ribbons. Property deeds, tax receipts, old letters, and one envelope that stood out. It was thick, sealed in pale cream, addressed to both me and my brother. My heart thudded so loudly I thought it might wake the entire neighborhood. I hesitated, knowing that whatever was inside could change everything. Yet at the same time I couldn't leave it unopened. Slowly I broke the seal and pulled out the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably my mother's, neat and deliberate, each word carrying weight and care. I sank to the floor, clutching it, feeling as though her voice had returned just to whisper in my ears. And then I noticed something else. There were notes tucked between the deeds, tiny instructions about the land, reminders that it should never be sold without mutual consent. My stomach clenched. He had to have known about these. My brother had walked into the county office with my mother's own rules tucked under his nose and ignored them completely. A shiver ran through me. This wasn't just fraud. This was betrayal layered on top of betrayal, and it cut deeper than I expected. I spent the rest of the night sifting through the box, piecing together everything Mom had left behind. Every document, every note, every little scribble painted a picture of a woman determined to protect the home she loved. A home I had grown up in and sacrificed so much to maintain. And now, as the moonlight spilled across the floorboards, I realized that the box in the closet was more than just papers. It was ammunition, proof that could fight back against the theft that had blindsided me. But I also knew one thing. Discovering it was just the beginning. I had the tools to expose him, but executing that plan would take careful steps, patience, and courage I wasn't sure I had in the middle of the night. Still, clutching the letter, I felt something stir inside me. A fierce, unyielding determination. This wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about honoring Mom, her wishes, and the legacy of everything she had worked for. And I would not let him take it without a fight. My hands shook as I carefully unfolded the letter from Mom. The familiar loops of her handwriting jumped out at me, almost alive in the dim light of my room. "If anything happens to me, the land must stay in both your names equally. No one sells without the other." She had even underlined it twice, as if making sure that whoever read it could never miss the rule. Tears blurred my vision as I realized the weight of her words. They were not suggestions, not wishes. They were instructions. clear and unbreakable. I ran my fingers over the paper again, as if touching it could somehow bring her presence closer. Give me guidance, give me a path forward. And then the anger came. My brother had known this. He had to have. Mom's words were clear, and yet he had ignored them, selling the land as if her voice didn't matter. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of grief and rage that made me want to scream. I thought back to every moment I had spent maintaining the house after Mom passed. The hours repairing the roof, the nights making sure the pipes didn't burst, the long days paying property taxes from my own savings. Every sacrifice, every lonely day spent preserving her legacy, and he had walked in and taken it away. My hands balled into fists around the letter. How could someone be so reckless? So cruel? I realized then that this wasn't just about property. It was about respect, about memory, about honoring the only woman who had truly shaped us. And as much as I wanted to lash out, I also knew I had to be smart. Mom's words were my weapon, my proof that the sale was invalid, my evidence that the land belonged to both of us. I had to keep my anger in check, follow the trail of truth, and let the law do what my brother had tried to bypass. Still, the letter felt heavy in my hands, as though it carried the weight of my mother's spirit, demanding that I act. And I promised her silently, right there in the dark, that I would fight. I would not allow her legacy to be erased. I would not let him take what belonged to both of us. And for the first time in days, despite the fear and the anger, I felt a small, quiet spark of hope. Mom's words were my guide, my shield, and my rallying cry. And with them, I finally knew where to begin. The next morning, I met with my second lawyer, a sharp woman named Elena who carried an air of calm authority. Unlike the first one, she didn't glance at me like I was chasing a lost cause. Instead, she leaned over the stack of papers I had brought, Mom's letter, the forged documents, the notary records, and studied them with intense focus. This isn't just fraud, she said finally, looking up from the pile. This is coordinated. I froze. Coordinated how? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She tapped the documents. He had help. This didn't happen in a vacuum. Someone aided him in creating the fake identity, filing the papers, and convincing others it was legitimate. My stomach twisted. The thought of my brother orchestrating something so elaborate, while I had been struggling alone, made me feel both terrified and furious. Elena continued, and the court takes these things seriously, especially when there's evidence of multiple parties involved in deception. This gives us leverage. I exhaled, a mixture of relief and tension. For the first time, I felt that my fight wasn't hopeless. There was a path forward. She outlined a plan. Track down the notary, identify anyone involved in the fake signature, document every financial transaction tied to the sale. We'll need patience and precision, she said. One wrong move and it could all collapse. I nodded, determination tightening in my chest. This was no longer just about revenge, it was about justice, about honoring Mom, about proving that her words had meaning. As we left the office, Elena paused and said, Talia, he underestimated you. That's his mistake. The words resonated with me as I stepped out into the bright afternoon. The city hummed around me, oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. Every memory of the house, of Mom, of the years I had spent holding everything together alone, fueled a fire inside me. My brother thought he had one. He thought he could walk in, sign some papers, and erase decades of family history. He was wrong. And Elena's calm confidence gave me the sense that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't get away with it. I walked home that day holding Mom's letter tightly in my hand, imagining every step of the legal battle ahead. It would be long, messy, and exhausting. But I would not let him intimidate me, not when everything we had built together was at stake. The first lawyer had dismissed me. Elena believed in the truth, and suddenly so did I. The fight was far from over, but now I felt ready. I felt that spark of hope that had eluded me since that morning when the sold sign went up. Mom's voice, my lawyer's strategy, and my own resolve merged into something powerful. I would make sure that the land remained ours no matter what it took. This wasn't just about winning a case anymore. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen, and making sure my brother understood that some things, especially what's tied to family and memory, could never be taken so easily. The following week, Elena and I finally tracked down the notary listed on the sale documents. His small office smelled faintly of ink and old paper, A place that looked harmless enough, but I felt my pulse quicken as we stepped inside. You verified the identity of the person signing these papers? Elena asked, sliding the stack across the desk. The man adjusted his glasses nervously. Yes. I followed protocol. Checked the ID matched the signature. His voice trailed off when he noticed my presence. I leaned in slightly. Whose ID did you actually check? The notary swallowed, glancing at the papers. It had your name on it. Your signature, it looked right. Elena's eyes narrowed. And did it look like you verified that it was actually her? He hesitated. Well, I assumed the person presenting it was her. They had a valid ID. Elena tapped the table sharply. Valid ID, but whose face was on it? The notary shifted uncomfortably and pulled a laminated copy from his drawer. My heart sank as I stared at the ID. It had my name and my birth date, yes, but the photograph was a stranger. Someone who resembled me enough that he didn't question it. He brought someone to impersonate me? I whispered, barely able to breathe. Elena nodded, her expression grim. He didn't just forge a signature. He manufactured an entire identity to make this look legitimate. That's serious fraud. The notary muttered. I thought everything looked in order. I didn't know. But I could see the cracks forming in the illusion my brother had built. Elena looked at me and said, now we have a clear chain of deception. He didn't act alone. This is deliberate, premeditated. This changes everything for the court. My stomach twisted with both anger and relief. Anger at my brother for orchestrating such a cruel scheme, and relief because finally, there was undeniable proof that I had not consented. The weight of helplessness that had pressed on me since the sold sign went up began to lift slightly. As we left the office, I kept glancing at the photo on the ID. Someone had been paid to impersonate me. Someone had helped him build a lie so convincing that even the law seemed to side with him for a moment. But Elena was right. Their confidence had blinded them. Now we had a critical piece of evidence, one that exposed the fraud in its entirety. I clenched my fists, a surge of determination coursing through me. He had made a fatal mistake. He thought he could erase years of memory, of struggle, of family loyalty with a few forged papers. But the truth had a way of catching up. And I had Elena to make sure it did. That night I couldn't sleep, but my mind raced with plans. Every legal avenue, every witness, every possible loophole that could work in my favor. I had to make sure none of it was wasted. The next step was clear. Unravel the financial trail, find every person involved, and prepare for the confrontation that would finally expose him. And I promised myself I would not let him win. Not now. Not ever. The moment I saw the ID used in the sale, my stomach dropped. At first glance it looked legitimate, my name printed clearly, a date of birth matching mine, and even a signature that seemed almost mine, except for a subtle slant I knew was wrong. My lawyer Elena held it carefully, turning it in the light. It's close enough to fool someone who isn't paying attention, she said softly. My heart sank. This wasn't just forgery. Someone had physically impersonated me in front of a notary, and that someone had been carefully selected to resemble me at a glance. My mind raced through the possibilities. He didn't just forge my signature. He orchestrated an entire act of deception. The thought made my chest tighten. I remembered the day I had confronted him in the driveway, his calm smile that dared me to argue. Now I understood why he had been so confident. I had been outmatched not by luck but by meticulous planning. The ID was just one piece. I needed to see everything, trace every step of this scam. Elena explained that someone must have posed as me during the notary appointment, and that person would have needed instructions, a script even, to answer questions convincingly. He probably coached them, she said. This was no spur-of-the-moment fraud. I imagined a stranger sitting in my mother's old office, flipping through papers pretending to be me. My chest tightened and I felt anger flare hotter than ever. Every memory of my childhood in that house, playing in the yard, climbing the old oak tree, baking cookies with Mom, felt violated. It wasn't just land. It was every memory tied to that place. And he had used a stranger to steal it from me. My hands shook as I examined the ID again. The photo wasn't perfect. At closer inspection, the eyes didn't match mine. The shape of the nose was subtly different. The mouth carried a hint of someone else's expression. Elena noted that the notary would have been unlikely to question a photo that was good enough if the papers looked authentic. It made me feel sick to think of how casually the whole thing might have passed unnoticed. He had relied on the system's assumptions and people's trust. He had manipulated everyone, banking on the fact that no one would suspect a fake identity so carefully executed. And now, armed with this proof, Elena said we had a key breakthrough. This wasn't just a civil case. It was clear fraud, impersonation, and conspiracy. For the first time since I had discovered the sale, I felt a spark of hope. I would bring the truth to light. He could try to argue, deny, or intimidate, but the fake identity would not lie. It was evidence, physical and undeniable, that he had gone far beyond mere carelessness or misjudgment. He had planned this step by step, and now every step had a trace. I took a deep breath, clutching the ID. This chapter of his deception was exposed, and for the first time the scale of what I could fight for became clear. This was not just my land, it was my truth, my mother's legacy, and my right to demand justice. When Elena started digging into his finances, the full picture began to emerge, and it was worse than I had imagined. She showed me spreadsheets, bank statements, and hidden transactions that made my stomach churn. He was drowning in debt, and not just a little. There were loans, credit lines, and unpaid taxes stacked so high they could have crushed him on their own. Every withdrawal and transfer had a purpose, and it became obvious. The land sale wasn't about convenience or a misunderstanding. It was a desperate attempt to save himself from financial ruin. My mind raced as I thought about all the times he had boasted, acted untouchable, and somehow made it seem like he had his life together. The truth was terrifying. He had been reckless, careless, and willing to destroy our family's legacy just to plug holes in his own failing finances. Elena pointed out that the timing of the sale wasn't random. Every transaction coincided with deadlines for his loans, some of which carried penalties that would double if left unpaid. He needed this money fast, she said quietly, and I felt a mix of anger and grim understanding. Suddenly, the forgery, the fake ID, the hired impersonator, it all made sense. It wasn't just a cruel whim. It was calculated, and it was meant to protect him while putting me and everything I had worked for at risk. I could almost see him sitting in his apartment, calculating numbers, imagining how quickly he could offload the property, how easily the developer would buy it, and how smoothly he could erase me from the equation. The audacity of it made me shiver. And yet, seeing the financial trail gave me a tool I hadn't had before. Every bank record, every suspicious payment, every untraceable withdrawal could be turned into evidence to prove motive. He didn't act randomly, he acted with greed and desperation. Elena emphasized that motive was everything in court. This financial picture would give the judge context, showing that the fraud wasn't accidental or miscommunication but intentional. I felt a surge of determination. He had underestimated me, assumed I would be too shocked, too angry, too exhausted to fight back. But now I had clarity, and with clarity came focus. I would trace every dollar, every paper trail, every attempt to hide his actions. He had built a house of cards, relying on secrecy, speed, and my absence to succeed. And now, I would use the truth of his finances to dismantle it. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about exposing the full scale of his deception. Every document, every ledger, every hidden debt was a piece of the puzzle, proving that this was not simply a family dispute. It was fraud, manipulation, and theft executed with precision. I clenched my fists as I looked at the records, realizing that the path ahead was clearer than ever. Justice wouldn't come from luck. It would come from uncovering the truth he thought he could hide. And this financial trail? It would be the chain that held him accountable. I didn't expect support to feel this quiet. After everything Elena uncovered, after the fake identity, the forged signature, and the financial mess, I thought the truth would be enough to bring people to my side. I was wrong. I started calling family the next day. Uncles, cousins, even people I hadn't spoken to in years but who had spent holidays at that house, who had sat at my mother's table and laughed under that same roof. I thought if anyone understood what that land meant, it would be them. The first call lasted less than 2 minutes. "Talia, maybe there's more to this," my aunt said gently. "Your brother wouldn't just do something like that without a reason." I stared at the wall, gripping my phone tighter. "He forged my signature," I said. "There's proof." A pause. Then softer. "I'm sure it's complicated." Complicated? That word followed me through every call. No one said I was wrong. No one said he was right. They just hovered in the middle, careful, distant, like stepping too close might pull them into something they didn't want to face. One cousin told me, "Maybe he thought it was best for both of you." Another said, "You know how things get with property, it can get messy." I ended each call feeling smaller, like the truth I was holding was somehow too heavy for anyone else to carry with me. By the fifth call, I stopped explaining. I just listened. Listened to the hesitation, the careful words, the quiet distance. It wasn't support. It wasn't even denial. It was avoidance. And that hurt more than I expected. Because these were people who had seen me stay. Who knew I was the one who took care of Mom. Who kept the house standing when everything else fell apart. They knew. And still they chose not to stand beside me. I sat on the edge of my bed after the last call, the room feeling too quiet, too still. My phone rested in my lap, screen dark, no messages, no missed calls, nothing. It hit me then, slowly but clearly, I was alone in this. Not just physically but emotionally. The kind of alone that doesn't come from distance but from people choosing not to show up. I thought about my brother, about how easily he had stepped into this situation, confident, prepared, surrounded by people who believed his version of the story. And then I looked at myself, sitting in the same house I had fought to keep alive, realizing that doing the right thing doesn't always come with support. Sometimes it comes with silence. But something shifted in me in that moment. The silence didn't break me the way I thought it would. It hardened something instead. Made things clearer. I wasn't fighting for approval. I wasn't fighting to convince anyone. I was fighting because it was right. Because Mom's words mattered. Because the truth mattered. I didn't need a room full of people standing behind me to know that. I just needed to stand. And as I picked up my phone and set it aside, I made a quiet decision. If no one else was going to speak up, then I would. If no one else was going to stand with me, then I would stand alone. Because some things are worth fighting for. Even when the only voice you hear is your own. He showed up without warning, like he still had the right to walk into my life whenever he wanted. I opened my apartment door and froze when I saw him standing there. Hands in his pockets, like this was normal. Like we were about to have a calm conversation over coffee instead of standing on opposite sides of something that had already gone too far. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, controlled. I didn't move aside. "Say it from there." For a second something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance, maybe even surprise, but it disappeared just as quickly. He stepped closer anyway. Close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw. "Drop the case," he said. Just like that. No apology. No explanation. Just a demand. I let out a short, disbelieving breath. "You forged my signature," I said. "You stole the land." "It's not that simple," he snapped, his calm cracking for the first time. "It never is with you." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Then explain it," I said. "Explain the fake ID. Explain the woman who pretended to be me." He looked away for half a second, and that was all I needed to see. Not guilt. Not regret. Just calculation. When he looked back at me, his voice had changed. Harder now. Sharper. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Dragging this into court. You don't understand what you're starting." I crossed my arms, holding my ground even as my heart started to pound faster. "No," I said quietly. "You don't understand. I'm finishing it." That's when the air shifted. I saw it happen in real time the moment he stopped trying to reason with me and decided to pressure me instead. His eyes narrowed slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped just enough to make every word land heavier. "If you don't drop this," he said, "you're going to lose more than just that house." The words hung between us, heavy and deliberate. My stomach tightened, a wave of unease rising before I could stop it. "Is that a threat?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave a small shrug, like it wasn't important, like he hadn't just crossed a line he couldn't step back from. "I'm trying to help you," he said. "You think the developer's just going to walk away from this? You think there won't be consequences?" I held his gaze, refusing to let him see how much that hit me, because part of me did wonder. Part of me felt the weight of what I was up against, the money, the lawyers, the people behind that deal. But stronger than that fear was something else. Anger. Clear, steady anger that burned away the doubt. The only mistake here, I said, my voice steady now. Was you thinking I wouldn't fight back? For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he exhaled sharply, shaking his head like I was the problem, like I was the one making this difficult. You've always been like this, he muttered. Stubborn. Emotional. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. And you've always been like this, I said. Taking what isn't yours and calling it yours anyway. That landed. I saw it in the way his expression tightened, in the way his shoulders stiffened. He stepped back then, finally putting space between us. You'll regret this, he said, flat and certain. I didn't answer. I just stood there watching him turn and walk away, his steps quick, controlled like he was holding something in. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. The fear he planted was real. I couldn't deny that. But so was something else. Resolve. Stronger than before. He tried to scare me into backing down. Instead, he made it clear just how far he was willing to go. And if that's what I was up against, then walking away was no longer an option. We filed the case on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday afternoon, everything shifted. Up until that moment, the developer had acted untouchable, calm, polished, and completely certain that the deal was secure. That confidence didn't last. Elena got the call first. I could tell something had changed just by the way she said my name when I answered. They want a meeting, she said. Not asked. Not suggested. Wanted. Urgently. We met them the next day in a glass-walled office downtown, the kind of place designed to make you feel small before you even sit down. But this time it didn't work on me. Because the moment they walked in I saw it, the shift. The man who had brushed me off before didn't smile the same way. His handshake was firmer than necessary, his posture too straight, like he was holding something together. This situation is unexpected, he said, choosing each word carefully. Elena didn't even blink. Is it? She replied. Silence stretched across the table, thin and tense. I sat still, watching, listening, letting Elena take control. That was part of the plan. Let them talk. Let them reveal what they were worried about. The developer cleared his throat and glanced at the man beside him. His lawyer, I assumed, before continuing. We conducted this purchase in good faith, he said. All documents were verified. All procedures were followed. Including verifying a forged signature and a fake identity? Elena asked calmly. That landed. I saw it in the flicker of irritation that crossed his face, quickly replaced by something tighter. Controlled. If there was a misrepresentation, he said slowly, then that responsibility may not fall on us. There it was. The first crack. They weren't denying the fraud anymore. They were trying to distance themselves from it. Elena leaned forward slightly, her voice still calm, still steady. You're currently developing land that was transferred under fraudulent circumstances, she said. That makes this your problem. Another pause. Longer this time. The room felt different now, like the balance had shifted without anyone saying it out loud. I realized then that they weren't just concerned, they were calculating risk. Real risk. Legal risk. Financial risk. Reputational risk. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't the one on the defensive. The developer exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers once against the table before stopping himself. What exactly are you asking for? He said. Not if I was wrong. Not if I could prove it. What I wanted. That alone told me everything. I looked at Elena, and she gave a slight nod, letting me speak. My voice was steady when I answered. I'm not asking for anything, I said. I'm taking back what was never his to sell. The words hung in the air, clear and final. No negotiation. No compromise. The developer leaned back in his chair, studying me now in a way he hadn't before. Not dismissive. Not confident. Careful. This could get complicated, he said. It already is, Elena replied. Another silence followed, heavier than before. Then the developer nodded once, slow and deliberate. We'll review everything, he said, and respond through counsel. It sounded formal, controlled. But beneath it I heard something else. Uncertainty. Maybe even concern. The meeting ended quickly after that. No handshakes this time. No polite smiles. Just quiet exits and tight expressions. As we stepped outside into the afternoon light, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. They're worried, I said. Elena gave a small knowing smile. They should be. I looked back at the building, at the glass reflecting the sky like nothing had changed. But everything had. Because for the first time since I saw that sold sign, the people on the other side of this weren't so sure they were going to win. And that meant something important. It meant the truth was starting to catch up to them. I didn't realize how fragile their entire deal was until Elena placed the contract in front of me and told me to read one specific section. It looked like any other legal document at first. Dense paragraphs, precise wording, the kind of language meant to confuse more than clarify. But buried halfway through, under a heading most people would skim past, was the clause that changed everything. Read that line again, Elena said quietly, tapping the page. I leaned closer, forcing myself to slow down to take in every word. If fraud, misrepresentation, or falsified documentation is proven in relation to the transfer of ownership, this agreement shall be rendered null and void without compensation to the seller. I blinked. Then read it again. And again, letting it sink in fully this time. No compensation, I said under my breath. Elena nodded. Which means if we prove fraud, the sale doesn't just get challenged, she said. It collapses. A strange mix of disbelief and realization settled over me. All this time I thought I was fighting to reverse something complicated, something that would take months, maybe years to untangle. But this clause meant something different. It meant the entire structure of the deal depended on one thing. The assumption that everything had been done legally. And it hadn't. Not even close. So they lose everything? I asked. The land, the money, the project, everything tied to this contract, Elena confirmed. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Suddenly, the developer's reaction at the meeting made perfect sense. The tension, the careful words, the shift in tone. They weren't just worried about a dispute. They were staring at the possibility of total loss. And my brother? He hadn't just risked my share of the land. He had walked into an agreement that could blow up completely the moment the truth came out. He didn't think this through, I said quietly. Elena gave a slight shake of her head. He thought he wouldn't get caught, she replied. That hit harder than I expected. Because she was right. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't poor judgment or confusion. It was a calculated risk built on one assumption, that I wouldn't fight back, or worse, that I wouldn't even notice in time. I looked down at the clause again, tracing the words with my eyes like I needed to confirm they were real. Null and void. No compensation. It was final. Clean. Unforgiving. Exactly the opposite of everything he had done to get that sale through. This changes everything, I said. It sharpens everything, Elena corrected gently. Now it's not just about proving what he did. It's about showing how it affects everyone involved. I nodded slowly, understanding what she meant. This wasn't just my fight anymore. The developer had a stake. Their investors had a stake. Every person tied to that deal now had a reason to care about the truth. And that kind of pressure spreads fast. For the first time I could see the full picture clearly. The forged signature. The fake identity. The financial desperation. And now this clause sitting quietly in the contract like a trap waiting to be triggered. He thought he was solving his problems. Instead, he created a situation where one truth could undo everything. I closed the document carefully, my hand steady now. Then we prove it, I said. Elena met my gaze, her expression calm but certain. We will, she said. And as I stood there, holding on to that single powerful piece of the puzzle, I realized something had shifted again. This wasn't just about taking back what was mine. It was about watching a lie unravel, completely irreversibly, the moment it was exposed. The call came in just after noon, and I knew something was different the moment Elena said, "You need to come in." Her voice wasn't tense, but it carried a kind of quiet urgency that made my chest tighten. By the time I reached her office, she was already seated with someone else. A woman. She looked up when I walked in, and for a second everything felt surreal. She wasn't exactly like me, but I could see how it worked, the same hair color, similar build, features close enough that no one paying casual attention would question it. My stomach dropped before anyone even said a word. "Talia," Elena said gently. "This is the woman who signed the documents." The room went completely still. The woman shifted in her seat, her hands clasped tightly together like she was holding them in place. She wouldn't meet my eyes at first. I didn't know, she said quickly, her voice shaky. I swear I didn't know what it was. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down slowly, my pulse loud in my ears. Then what did you think you were signing? I asked. She swallowed hard before answering. He told me it was just paperwork, she said. Something about a property transfer that was already agreed on. He said you couldn't be there, and he needed someone to stand in. The words felt heavy, each one confirming what we already suspected, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. He paid you, Elena said, not as a question. The woman nodded, her eyes dropping to her hands. Cash, she admitted. I didn't ask questions. I just needed the money. A quiet anger built in my chest, steady and sharp, but it wasn't aimed at her. Not completely. She looked scared, regretful. Nothing like the calculated confidence my brother had shown. Did you show ID? Elena asked. He gave it to me, she said. Said it was already taken care of. My breath caught slightly. Of course he had. Every step planned. Every detail handled. He didn't leave anything to chance except this. Except the possibility that she might come forward. Why now? I asked, finally meeting her eyes. This time she didn't look away. Because I saw the case, she said quietly, and I realized what it really was. Her voice wavered, but she kept going. I didn't agree to help someone steal something. I didn't agree to be part of that. The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different. Not tense. Certain. Elena leaned back slightly, her expression focused. Would you be willing to testify? She asked. The woman hesitated, fear flickering across her face. Will I get in trouble? She asked. We'll work through that, Elena said calmly. What matters right now is the truth. Another pause. Then the woman nodded, small but firm. I'll tell them everything, she said. And just like that, something shifted again. I felt it deep in my chest, a release of pressure I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Because this was the missing piece. The one thing that turned suspicion into proof, that turned a complicated case into something undeniable. He didn't just forge my signature. He orchestrated the entire thing. I looked at her one more time, taking in the weight of what she had just done. She didn't fix everything. She didn't undo what happened. But she told the truth when it mattered. And that was enough to change everything. As we stood to leave, Elena gave me a brief glance, one that said more than words. This was it. The turning point. And for the first time since this started, I knew with complete certainty. He wasn't getting out of this. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything fell apart for him. Instead, the cracks started small, almost unnoticeable. Missed calls, short messages, a shift in tone that only someone who knew him as well as I did would catch. First, I ignored them. I had spent so much time chasing him, demanding answers, trying to force accountability, that stepping back felt unnatural. But this time I didn't respond. I let the silence sit between us, heavy and deliberate. The first message came late at night. We need to talk. Simple. Controlled. Like he still believed he was in charge of how this would go. I stared at it, then locked my phone and set it face down on the table. The next one came the following morning. Call me. This is getting out of hand. I almost laughed at that. Getting out of hand. As if he hadn't been the one to start all of this. As if I was the problem for refusing to let it slide. Days passed and the messages changed. They lost their polish, their careful wording. You don't understand what you're doing. Then, you're making this worse for everyone. And finally, the one that told me everything I needed to know, fix this. I read that last message twice, feeling something settle in my chest. Not anger, not even satisfaction, but clarity. He wasn't asking anymore. He wasn't explaining or justifying. He was reacting. For the first time, he didn't have control over the situation, and it showed in every word he sent. I still didn't reply. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I finally understood that I didn't need to say anything at all. The truth was already moving forward without my help. The case was building. The evidence was stacking. And now the witness had stepped in, adding weight that couldn't be ignored or explained away. I started noticing other signs too. Mutual contacts reaching out with vague questions. Is everything okay between you two? He seemed stressed. One even said, "He's been asking if you'll settle." That word stuck with me. Settle. As if this was a negotiation. As if what he did could be reduced to a compromise. It couldn't. Not anymore. I heard he had been calling the developer constantly, trying to reassure them, trying to keep them from pulling away. But it was too late for that. The doubt had already set in. The confidence he once carried so easily was slipping, replaced by urgency, then frustration, then something closer to panic. And I could feel it even without seeing him. It was there in every message he sent, every unanswered call, every attempt to regain control of something that was already unraveling. The strange part was how calm I felt watching it happen. Not because I enjoyed it, I didn't, but because it confirmed what I had been fighting for from the beginning. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. It doesn't disappear just because someone wants it to. It waits. And when it surfaces, it doesn't come back quietly. Changes everything. By the end of that week, the messages stopped. No more calls. No more demands. Just silence. But this silence was different from before. Before it felt like distance. Now it felt like pressure building on the other side. Like he was running out of moves, out of options, out of time. And for the first time since I saw that sold sign in the yard, I realized something fully, completely, without doubt. He was losing. The courtroom felt smaller than I expected, but heavier. Like every word spoken inside it carried more weight than it should. I arrived early, sitting quietly beside Elena as people filtered in one by one, lawyers, clerks, strangers with their own cases, their own problems. But none of that mattered to me. My focus stayed on one thing, the door. When he finally walked in, I felt it before I saw him. That shift in the air. That familiar tension. He didn't look at me right away. He moved with less confidence than I remembered. His steps slower, more careful, like he was aware that every move was being watched. When his eyes finally met mine, it wasn't anger I saw. It wasn't even defiance. It was something quieter. Something closer to resignation. And that unsettled me more than anything else. We took our places as the room settled into silence. The judge entered, calm and composed, and everything officially began. Names were called. Formalities were handled. But underneath it all, I could feel the pressure building like a storm waiting to break. His lawyer started strong, speaking clearly, confidently, laying out their argument like it still had a chance to stand. "This is a matter of misunderstanding between family members," he said. "A disagreement over property rights, complicated by emotional involvement." I almost let out a breath at that. A misunderstanding. That was how they were framing it. But when it was Elena's turn, the tone shifted immediately. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She simply began laying out the facts one by one, like pieces being placed exactly where they belonged. "This is not a misunderstanding," she said. "This is a case of deliberate fraud." The word hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. I glanced at my brother then. He was staring straight ahead, jaw tight, hands clasped together. Not reacting. Not interrupting. Just listening. As if he already knew where this was going. The judge listened carefully, occasionally asking questions, but mostly letting the evidence speak. And there was a lot of it. The forged signature. The notary record. The fake identification. Each detail added weight, building something solid and difficult to ignore. I felt my heartbeat steady as the case unfolded. Not because it was easy, but because it was clear. There were no gaps. No confusion. Just truth presented piece by piece. At one point, the judge looked directly at him. "Did you obtain consent from your sister before proceeding with the sale?" she asked. The room went still. He hesitated. Just for a second. But that second said everything. "I believed I had the authority," he answered carefully. It wasn't a denial. It wasn't an admission. It was something in between. And it wasn't enough. I saw it in the judge's expression. I felt it in the shift around the room. That thin thread they were holding onto was starting to snap. As the hearing continued, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to fully accept until that moment. This wasn't just about proving what happened anymore. That part was already done. This was about watching it be recognized, officially, legally, in a way that couldn't be undone or ignored. I looked at him again, really looked this time. The confidence was gone. The control was gone. All that was left was someone sitting in a place he couldn't talk his way out of. And as the final arguments wrapped up and the room fell quiet once more, I understood something with complete certainty. He knew exactly how this would end, and for the first time so did I. By the time we reached the final phase of the hearing, the room felt different, quieter, heavier, like everyone already understood what was coming but needed to see it laid out completely. This was where everything came together. Not just claims or arguments but proof. Real, undeniable proof. Elena stood, calm as ever, and began presenting the evidence in a way that left no space for confusion. First, the signature. Enlarged copies were placed before the court, side by side. My real signature and the one used on the sale documents. At a glance they looked similar. That was the point. But under closer inspection, the differences were clear. The spacing. The pressure points. The slight hesitation in the strokes. "This is not her signature," Elena stated plainly. No emotion. Just fact. Then came the notary record. The official log, the timestamp, the certification that the person signing had presented valid identification. "And this," Elena continued, "is the identification used during that process. The fake ID was submitted into evidence." I felt my chest tighten slightly as it was passed forward. My name. My details. But not my face. The courtroom remained silent, but I could feel the shift, subtle but undeniable. This wasn't abstract anymore. It was visible. Tangible. Real. Then came the witness. The woman who had taken my place walked forward. Her steps hesitant but steady enough. She was sworn in, her voice soft but clear as she answered each question. She explained how she was approached. How she was told it was routine. How she was paid. "Did you believe you were impersonating the rightful owner of the property?" Elena asked. The woman shook her head. "No," she said. "I didn't understand what it really was." A pause. Then more firmly. "But I do now." And then the moment that sealed it. "Who instructed you to sign those documents?" Elena asked. The woman didn't hesitate this time. She turned slightly and pointed directly at him. The air in the room seemed to collapse inward. I didn't look at him right away. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. When I finally did glance over, his expression had changed again. Not just tension. Not just control slipping. This was something else. The realization that there was nothing left to argue. No angle left to twist. No version of the story that could survive what had just been said. His lawyer didn't object. Didn't interrupt. Didn't even try to redirect in a meaningful way. That told me more than anything else could. Because if there had been a way to challenge it, he would have taken it. Instead, he stayed seated, flipping through papers that no longer mattered. Elena finished by tying everything together: signature, identification, witness testimony, and financial motive. Each piece alone raised questions. Together they formed a clear, complete picture. "This was not an error," she said in closing. "It was a coordinated act of fraud designed to bypass legal consent and transfer ownership unlawfully." The judge nodded slightly, making a note, her expression unchanged but focused. And in that moment I understood something fully. There was no more debate. No more uncertainty. Everything that needed to be said had been said. Everything that needed to be shown had been shown. I sat there, hands resting quietly in my lap, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Not relief. Not yet. But certainty. The kind that doesn't come from hope, but from truth standing on its own, without needing anything else to support it. I looked forward as the room fell silent again, waiting for what came next. Because now it wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about the outcome. And deep down I already knew what it would be. Just when it felt like everything had already been decided, he finally spoke. Up until that moment, he had stayed quiet, letting his lawyer do the talking, letting the evidence pile up without interruption. But now, as the judge prepared to move forward, he rose slowly from his seat. The movement itself felt heavy, like it took more effort than it should. Every eye in the courtroom shifted toward him, and for a brief second the silence sharpened. This was it, his last chance to say something, anything that might change the direction this was heading. "Your Honor," he began, his voice controlled but thinner than before. "This land, it wasn't just hers." I felt my chest tighten slightly, but I didn't move. I didn't look at him. I just listened. "It was mine too," he continued. his tone gaining a faint edge, like he was reaching for something solid to stand on. I grew up there. I have a right to it. I made a decision that I believed was necessary. Necessary. That word echoed in my mind, hollow and misplaced. The judge watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. She didn't interrupt. She let him continue, giving him the space to explain himself fully. But the more he spoke, the clearer it became. This wasn't a defense. It was justification. I didn't think she would object, he said. And that was the first moment I actually looked at him. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to understand how he could say that after everything. After the forged signature. After the impersonation. After the lies. He avoided my gaze as he went on. I handled the situation the best way I could at the time. Elena remained still beside me, saying nothing. She didn't need to. There was nothing here that could undo what had already been proven. The facts were too clear, too complete. This wasn't about misunderstanding ownership. It was about how he chose to act. And deep down I think he knew that. The judge leaned forward slightly, her hands resting calmly on the bench. When she finally spoke, her voice was even measured, but firm in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. You may have had an interest in the property, she said, but you did not have the legal authority to act in the manner you did. The room stayed completely still. Ownership does not grant permission for fraud, she continued, and it does not excuse the use of false identity or forged documentation. Each word landed with quiet finality. He stood there for a moment longer, as if waiting for something else, some opening, some chance to respond. But there wasn't one. The space he had been given was gone, and with it whatever argument he thought he had left. Slowly he sat back down. This time he didn't try to hold on to that same composed posture. His shoulders dropped slightly, the tension no longer hidden but visible, real. I felt something shift inside me as I watched him. Not sympathy, not forgiveness, but understanding. Not of his actions but of the moment. This was where it ended for him. Not with a dramatic collapse, not with an outburst, but with the quiet realization that nothing he said could change what he had done. I turned my attention back to the front, my hands steady, my breathing even. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to prove. The truth had already done its work. And now, all that remained was for it to be recognized. The judge glanced down at her notes, then back up at the room. And in that stillness, I knew we had reached the point where the courtroom felt impossibly still. The kind of silence that presses on your chest and makes every breath loud. I sat frozen, fingers clasped tightly in my lap, as the judge leaned forward, her expression calm but sharp. The anticipation was unbearable. Every second stretched out like hours. He sat beside his lawyer, shoulders hunched, staring at the floor as if looking down could make this all disappear. And then she spoke. After reviewing all evidence, testimonies, and documentation presented, she began, her voice steady. It is clear that the sale of the property in question was conducted under fraudulent circumstances. My stomach dropped. The words hit him like a hammer. Fraudulent circumstances. They weren't just legal jargon. They were a direct declaration of his failure, his lies, and his betrayal. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in my shoulders finally begin to loosen. He didn't move. He didn't respond. His lawyer's face went pale, lips pressing into a thin line, while the developer across the room shifted nervously, realizing the deal they thought was secure was unraveling fast. The sale is hereby declared invalid, effective immediately, the judge continued. Any contracts, transfers, or agreements made based on the forged documentation are null and void. A ripple went through the courtroom. Papers rustled. Lawyers whispered quietly to each other. My brother's world, his meticulously planned scheme, was crumbling in front of him. Instantly, irreversibly. I tried to steady myself, but the tears came anyway. A mixture of relief, exhaustion, and vindication. This was justice. Not delayed, not complicated, not uncertain, but immediate, sharp, and absolute. The judge's gavel came down with a decisive thud, and just like that, everything he had built, all the lies he had told, every carefully orchestrated step collapsed. No property, no money, no advantage. Gone. I could see it in his eyes, shock, disbelief, panic. He had expected battles, negotiations, delays, maybe some compromise. But he hadn't expected instant collapse. The developer leaned forward, whispering to his attorney, panic and calculation mixing in their expressions. They were trapped in a deal they no longer had control over. And my brother, he sat frozen, the weight of everything pressing down on him, heavier than he had ever known. I finally let myself exhale fully, my chest loosening. For months I had felt powerless. But now the scales had tipped, and the truth had won. Everything he had tried to manipulate, all the falsehoods, the forgery, the threats, they were meaningless in the face of the law, the facts, and my mother's unbroken legacy. Outside, the sunlight hit the windows in a way that seemed sharper, brighter, almost celebratory. I realized that while the courtroom was quiet, outside life continued. And this victory wasn't just legal. It was personal. I had fought not only for property but for respect, for justice, and for the truth. And in that moment it was ours. My brother slumped back in his seat, defeated, and I understood that this wasn't just a legal victory. It was the moment when everything he had counted on vanished before him. The gavel's echo still rang in my ears as I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world shift from my shoulders to his. The instant collapse wasn't just for him. It was for me, for my mother, and for the home that would never be stolen again. The courthouse doors opened, and the sunlight hit my face, warm but sharp, almost like it was highlighting his ruin. I followed the crowd outside, but my eyes couldn't leave him. My brother looked smaller, not physically, but like the weight of every bad choice, every betrayal, every lie had physically crushed him. His shoulders were hunched, his head bowed slightly, and the usual smirk that had once made me furious was gone, replaced by something almost pitiful. He glanced around as if expecting allies to appear out of nowhere, but no one came. The developer, the lawyers, even some distant relatives who had come out of curiosity, they all watched him with varying degrees of satisfaction, caution, and disbelief. It was a surreal scene, like he was in the center of a storm he hadn't prepared for. I stayed a few steps back, silent, my hands in my coat pockets, feeling a mix of vindication and sorrow. I didn't want him to see me smile, not yet, but I wanted him to feel the collapse he had caused. "They're coming after me," he muttered under his breath, barely audible, as he spoke to no one in particular. Caught it though. The panic in his voice was different from his usual arrogance. It was real. Legal charges, the developer's pushback, and the inevitable fallout from the fraud, they were all converging, and he had nowhere to run. The people who had once done his bidding, smiled at his schemes, or ignored his misdeeds now had reason to act. And he knew it. I could see the calculations in his eyes, the frantic attempts to figure out how to escape consequences, but there was no escape. He had gambled, cheated, and lied, and the world had finally called his bluff. A few neighbors who had watched the drama unfold for months whispered among themselves. I overheard one remark, "I guess no one can get away with that." Another shook her head, pity and disbelief in her tone. I realized that the downfall wasn't just legal. It was social, emotional, public. He had burned bridges, and the fires were now closing in on him from every angle. I watched him finally lift his head, meeting my eyes for the briefest moment, and I saw it there, recognition. Recognition of loss, of defeat, of the fact that he had destroyed not only the property but the trust and bond we had once shared. It was almost tragic, but the tragedy was of his own making. I turned slightly, letting the sunlight warm my face, feeling the wind, smelling the faint scent of freshly cut grass on the courthouse steps, and realized that the weight of the fight I had carried alone was finally easing. He had lost more than land. He had lost his credibility, his advantage, and the illusion of control he had clung to for years. The crowd began to thin, whispers fading, leaving him standing there like a man stripped of everything except the truth he could no longer hide. I didn't feel triumphant in a cruel way. I felt relieved. Relieved that justice, though slow, had arrived. Relieved that the home, my mother's land, would finally breathe again. And relieved that he had to face the reality he had worked so hard to ignore. The moment of reckoning had come, and there was no hiding from it. Weeks later I stood on the edge of the land, breathing in the crisp morning air. No sold signs, no strangers with contracts or briefcases, no black SUVs parked like silent threats. Just the earth beneath my feet, the trees swaying gently, and the quiet memories of everything that had come before. I walked slowly along the old path that led to where the house once stood, feeling the roughness of the soil, the unevenness of the stones my mother had placed decades ago. For a long moment, I simply stood there, letting the silence wrap around me like a familiar blanket, soothing the tension that had gripped me for months. This land had been more than property. It had been home, refuge, and the last link to my mother's spirit. And now, after all the lies, the betrayal, and the fear, it belonged to me, and not just legally but in every way that mattered. I started clearing the debris where the old house had been. The process was slow and methodical, almost meditative. I removed broken planks, stacked them neatly for firewood, and uncovered stones that had sunk into the earth, polishing them with my hands. Every small task felt like reclaiming not only the land but my own power and independence. I wasn't rebuilding the house the same way it had been. I didn't want a replica of the past. I wanted something stronger, something that could hold the weight of memory without collapsing under the shadows of betrayal. I sketched plans in my mind, imagining a home that welcomed the future while honoring the past. A place with large windows to catch the sunlight, sturdy walls to withstand storms, and open spaces where laughter could once again echo. I planted saplings along the edges, watching them bend in the wind, knowing they would grow strong over time, just as I had learned to grow stronger through this ordeal. The experience had reshaped me, hardened me in ways I hadn't imagined, and yet, it had also softened me in ways I hadn't expected. I could feel the lingering sadness for my brother, not for his mistakes, but for the person he might have been if he had chosen differently. I knelt and pressed my palms into the soil, feeling the pulse of life beneath my fingers. Every stone, every root, every patch of earth reminded me that resilience isn't about fighting alone. It's about knowing when to stand, when to let go, and when to build again. And as the sun rose higher, casting golden light across the land, I realized that I had already begun something far greater than a house. I had begun reclaiming my life, piece by piece, moment by moment, rooted in honesty, patience, and strength. The land was no longer just a reminder of betrayal. It was a testament to endurance, to hope, and to the future I could shape on my own terms. And in that quiet, powerful realization, I smiled, finally at peace. He didn't just lose the land. He lost the only person who would have shared it, nurtured it, and fought for it alongside him. And now I was ready to create something even better, something lasting, something mine.